and kick us off. Okay, welcome. So when some of the first students started joining today, I actually had to correct myself because I thought that we were in week 3, but we are in fact week 4 of the semester, which means that you are all officially 1/4 of the way through it already, believe it or not. So I just want to go over a couple of reminders about your assignments coming up. So I've said this before, but please keep in mind that any of the online assignments that you see week by week in Moodle, the hope is that you complete those before coming to class on Wednesdays. That way you're ready to and prepared to participate in our class. So you had 2 readings for this week, as well as the quiz that helped you think through some of the major issues from the 2 case examples in our empowerment text. So please go back through and make sure you complete that and any other quizzes that you might still need to finish up from the previous weeks. In terms of what we'll be doing next week, we're going to be focusing once again on your community lab number 1, Seeds of Success, so Seeds of Growth. So there it is important for you to note that we'd like you to share a draft of your lab artifact. That is the only online assignment you'll have for that week. And you'll see a link to the forum where you can do that. Please do that before you come to class next week. That way, we'll be spending time in breakout groups and you'll be able to review each other's work and comment and advise. Then do keep in mind that you will be responsible for submitting that final assignment at the end of next week. That's on Sunday, March 14th. So in class time, when we're in our group discussions, that will be your kind of final chance to get some outside opinion on how it's all coming together. You can also get some more feedback from us, the faculty and instructors, so that you're ready to go on submitting that first assignment. Just want to put one more plug in for office hours, which I am available. I'm available. I see your question, Matt. I'll get to that in just a second. Of course, every Monday from 12 to 1 Eastern time, also immediately after this class, and really any other time that suits you. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like a conversation one-on-one. I could do that. I can also bring in Luke or Daniel, depending on the scope of your question. So Matt, I see you've got a question of whether there are any templates on Mahara for reference. Great question. So as you know, in the past, we've really encouraged everyone to use Mahara to create an e-portfolio page. We're moving away from that restriction this time around, and that's because we want to leave it more open to you to do something that's going to be immediately helpful for your community context. So, you know, some people really like Mahara and they find it's a nice way to organize all their work across various classes. So by all means, continue to use that. But we also, you know, we could also see your assignment as a simple Word doc or a PDF or a PowerPoint or however you're going to be able to then actually use that moving forward. And that becomes increasingly important as we work on the upcoming community labs where you'll be really, really actively engaging and sharing with your other community members. So if you would like a template for Mahara, I do have some previous ones that I did when I was in this semester, and I'd be happy to share that with you. I can.
I think that's a good idea. Let's pull a couple from your class and contact those students, get permission to share. But share a few, and we can do that for all their assignments. There are a couple really good and diverse examples of this assignment, and I know that in the past that's been something, you know, your class really asked for, was, can we see examples of this? And luckily now this class can, because you all did this assignment last year. So
absolutely. And I see Daniel, you have something you want to add.
Very much. this is a superb question. And here's the key thing that each of you needs to be focusing on for this class. In this assignment, we want you to have a tool that you can use to engage your community more than the normal thing you do in a course, which is to engage your professors and giving you a grade. Okay? The way you're going to go to scale successfully is by maximizing the engagement and the relationships you have with your community. So you need to figure out what is the best format for you to present and engage in dialogue. Remember, you're not teaching your community, you're empowering your community. You want a platform that maximizes the discussion potential you have on this subject. And so focus on that, focus on the growing of impact and dialogue and relationships with your community. And then Luke and I and Rosie are much more likely to give you a top mark for this course than if you're figuring out how am I going to impress my professor. And furthermore, you'll make the world a better place, which is even more important now as March of 2021 begins and the world has some big questions before it.
Great. Any last questions on due dates, expectations, anything like that before I pass the mic over to Luke?
I had one more clarification question about the lab. The first section where it says artifact, is that like a section of response, or is that like the overarching whole thing is the artifact?
Okay, so how all the labs are structured in that table, right, is that the first row is an overview of the steps below it. So yeah, so when it's talking about the artifact, this is in general what your artifact should accomplish, should show, should demonstrate.
Okay, thank you.
Help? Yeah, no problem. Okay, great. Luke, over to you to talk about our material for this week.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks. It's really good to hear solid questions coming forward on the assignments. It makes it clear you all are thinking about them and working on them. So once again, do reach out. Rosie's obviously very available, and both Daniel and I do our level best to be available as often and frequently as possible. So I know, for instance, I'm meeting with at least 2 students later this week in the evening, and I'm happy to do that with anyone else who wants a one-on-one meeting about any specific issues. But today I'm really excited to revisit 2 stories that are very near and dear to my heart personally, and I know I see Daniel smile there. He feels the same way. And so just to kick it off, because this is an opportunity where we really want a lot of discussion. I have 2 different potential sets of class notes for how to organize today, but I'm happy to throw them all to the wind because it's a lot more fun when you get into these real life examples if we have a discussion together and to hear what were the things that really resonated with all of you. How do you think this relates to your work? Obviously, the text does a really good job at starting to weave it. You know, we talk about the case content, and then we talk about how it relates to seed scale. But today we really want to dive into the stories themselves and get into how it all happened, because these are stories that we have an intimate knowledge of. And so just to kick it off, what were these stories fundamentally about?
They are about social change.
Okay, what part of social change? Kind of what happens in that? There's a kind of general thing that happens in both stories. What is that? And it has to do with social change. What happens around that?
Community moved from being considered as poor to very active, informed community.
Okay, thank you, Albert. Very good answer. And I also think it's interesting the way you frame that they went from being poor. They went from, certainly, I agree, it's this story of them perceiving themselves as poor to going to utilize resources they already have, and from that becoming very empowered. So the commonalities between our two stories are obviously that they both take place in a similar part of India, and that in this we have two communities who had underlying social issues, and in these stories we hear about their transformation. And so thank you, Albert. Matt, do you want to speak up? I see you entered in the chat. Creating real change to make life better, and in some cases preserving lives. So how did they do that? What happened?
I was just reviewing some of the things that I had underlined before coming to class, but within the first month of being, is it pronounced Bemang? Is that how you say it?
Where?
Rima. Her name?
Bombing. It's bombing.
Bombing.
Right on. Yeah. Within the first month of being there, she noticed that the children were dying, and that caught her attention, and therefore that made her seek out how to influence and impact a change within child mortality. And then through education and teaching and sharing information, that process lowered the death rate.
Great. Yeah. So you hit on a couple key things. So just to jump right into our first story, which technically in the timeline comes later in history, right? Because one reason Rima is originally from Poland. So we'll talk a bit about that in itself as a form of scaling up, right? But Rima enters, she's just moved to bombing with her husband who was posted there. And even the story sets out, it doesn't talk enough about it, but that she's walking into this village. And the whole reason she's walking in the village is the road is out. And, but she's also finds out in those same interviews that that the food had been coming from outside of the village. They weren't producing enough food to feed the village. And now the road's out. So what we don't really talk about that much because we didn't have the hard data for it, but I can tell you because I visited bombing about a year after Rima's initial work, and I had to climb that same hill. And so the road was still out a year later, but the famine was over. But when Rima got there was very much a famine going on. They didn't have enough food. So yes, Rima just upon her arrival, starts to observe a whole lot of preventable social issues. And it's just obviously, we all know what it's like to move somewhere. You're assessing your situation. What's my new home going to be like? But specifically, what does Rima then do? Because many of us would say, okay, my new home might not be that great, right? But how does Rima respond to some of what she's finding? Melchiade, please.
To address to the issue of the folks in Bamenge, Rima organized a women into action group, and taught them how to do preventive practices and how to read and write, and how to protect against some disease.
Great, thank you. Yes, so Rima decides, she responds by starting to hold a meeting, a women's group meeting. She forms, as all of you did in ACC 601, she forms herself a small action group or coordinating committee. And she gets people to participate. Let's go back to our model for how scale happens. You want to start, you get participation and quality of life improving, right? So we want to look for how those two things are occurring in this story, because it's a great example of scale one mobilization. Yeah. And so she gets people to participate by making three promises, essentially, about what helping their quality of life. And she's going to help them keep their children from dying, to make their water safe, and teach them to read and write. And so what then happens? Is that a success? How does that go? Come on, folks. Irfani, please.
Me.
Oh, no, Chad?
Okay.
Uh,
Is,
I-
is
Oh,
the,
Irfani got his microphone off. Here, Irfani, I saw your hand was raised.
I think she was success because after she organized the people how to use the equipment and other resource already they have in their community. The action, the woman action group can take role how to prevent the deaths of children. As we read, there were governmental clinic before REMA, but it does not work well. But after she came to bombing and told the people, especially the women, how to work together and how to participate in their community. The clinic government work better, and they were able to prevent many diseases.
Thank you very much, Irfani, and very, very well, accurate answer, but also comprehensive. So yes, several things. So the action group was very much a success, and they started to get, as Irfani was saying, over time, we started to see a number of positive upticks. Basically, the statistics on this are that they almost halved their mortality rates, infant and child mortality. So I think they had the previous year they'd had 23, and the following year they had 12. So that's a substantial number right there. It also talks about how the doctor had left the clinic. The teacher, I love the story about the teacher who only shows up twice a year to open school and shut it down. But also the doctor is pretty funny too, because he decided to open a pharmacy across the street from his own clinic and was just seeing patients there as a private practice and was not doing his government service. So you had a lot of things not working. But let's talk about the group itself, because that's looking at the social participation. So initially, Rima had one group. Did that group grow? Does anybody remember the stats on that over 3 months? What was the growth pattern in terms of participation with her group? It's a pretty striking number. She went from one group to 5 groups in 3 months. So think about that from when you're starting to think about scaling up, right? Getting people to participate. At first there was no group. You have one group. That group grows quickly to 20 people, 30 people. Next thing you know, you're getting multiple groups that are, because bombing's on top of a ridge. And so then down a couple valleys behind it are other houses, and they're very scattered around. So some of these people were walking for hours just to get to this meeting with Rima. So they started to form other groups, and then Rima would go out and visit them. So we're getting a lot of participation. That's right there in the case. And then we're also getting some very clear indicators of the quality of life. So as Irfani correctly said, what was occurring, one thing that started to occur is that they were getting these good results that I just mentioned, like the health rate. But they did that by starting to improve the quality of services in the clinic, starting to the community offered to start paying the teacher and helping the teacher out. So they got the teacher to show up. So as we think about what was occurring there, were community doing all this themselves? I mean, were they the ones necessarily fixing? They were certainly mobilizing, but what were they able to do by mobilizing? Okay, the what they were doing, just to really give you all a sense, because we're looking at, and think back to a lot of our principles, right? We saw our 4 principles in these cases and they came forward. But specifically, what was occurring in the bombing case and also in Pollen, which we will talk about in 1 minute, is the community mobilized and was able to get existing services to work better. Right? At no point did they say, we're going to start our own clinic in either story. But the clinics feature very prominently in both stories. But they did, as does water lines. And in both cases, that is a government service that had broken down. And whether it's due to corruption, broken down, whether it's due to inefficiency, or just people were misusing it. But by the community mobilizing, they were able to achieve a lot of things themselves, reading and writing, starting their own kitchen gardens, income projects. But specifically, the reason that they're able to get this growth to occur so fast and so quickly is effectively engaging the top-down services. And this is going to come back over and over and over again when we think about scaling up, because we often think about those services, I like to call them mechanisms for scale. Because if you're able to get an existing service, the service is designed to reach a lot of people. But if it breaks down, but if you're able to fix that, you're often able to suddenly get the growth pattern to happen more effectively. Daniel, I saw you. I want to give you some room to elucidate on this point and your own experiences there in bombing.
Well, first of all, it was so much fun to watch this happen in bombing and in Poland. I mean, and you can have that fun too with your community work. It is just a lot of fun. But let me start by saying, who's paying WEMA to do this? I mean, we all have to get our pay. What is allowing WEMA to do this? What's allowed? I mean, let's be candid. How is she getting the money to buy her food? How is she getting the money to do this? I mean, it's great to
Her
talk
husband's
about
engineering salary, isn't it?
What?
Her husband's engineering salary?
Yes. Okay, there is money. The government is, in essence, to go to Luke's point, paying for this to be done because her husband's salary is allowing her to give her time. Now, there are issues of gender rights here. The man is being paid, the woman is doing the work. Okay, I'm fully aware of that. Certainly, every woman in this class has other situations where you've seen that inequity.
Well,
but
in fairness, though, the road was getting built, and that was Rima's husband's job. So I don't want to beat up on him. He was helping out too.
No, Rima's husband's actually he's a nice guy. But I wanted to move from. I just want to observe parenthetically that somebody is getting paid, and where the money string is happening, it's always good to follow the money. But I want to focus on a deeper issue, which was behind Luke's question, point that he was making. Remember the graphic of the revolution of rising aspirations? You all looked at that earlier. And if not, after this class, go back and look at that graph of the revolution of rising aspirations. Or Rosie, maybe you can just pull it up while the questions is, and we'll do a share screen. What is, before Rosie pulls it up, oh, she's already done it. Look at what's in the middle of that graph.
Thanks, Luke.
Rosie, you're so quick.
I had it ready.
Oh, you're all ready. Oh, Luke, fantastic. So see what is driving this?
Aspiration.
Aspirations and hopes and dreams. Is there any money in hope? I just said she's being paid. Is there any money in dreams? No. What is the engine in a hope and a dream? Come on.
Success.
A human energy.
What type of energy?
Human energy.
Yeah, and what's that energy doing? Is it punching somebody in the nose?
No. Bringing people together, like the hope rises, like as people continue to get involved.
That's right, but are they getting involved for ice cream?
The thing that increase the hope is achievement and success.
Right, but it's a very special, hope is a very special type of energy. It's a forward-looking energy. Okay, so it's very easy when we're talking about this energy of coming together, and it's actually exactly what Luke was saying and you all were saying. People were coming together. That was one type of human energy, but they were coming together for a different type of human energy, which was looking forward. It's called hope. It's called dreams. And often we don't think of dreams as rigorous science. It's hard to put dreams onto an Excel spreadsheet and a budget. But when you can take the energies of people and point them forward, then you get the situation Luke was talking about when everybody came to all those meetings. Now, here's my next question to you all. Albert's first comment when he gave his first answer, and everybody else who's commented so far in the class has used the word change. Okay, nobody's just defined it yet. What is change? You've all used that word. What does it mean? I'm not saying you're using a wrong word. I just want you to understand. Yeah, Albert.
Yeah, I wanted to say that change should mean better life.
But no, you can give me a better answer. You can give me a better, there's nothing wrong, but you can give me a better answer. Yeah, try again, Melchett.
Change means improving, life improved.
Right.
The understanding of our ability to change our life forward to a better life.
Right. In mathematics, we use the symbol delta for change, and it means going from someplace, going to someplace else. And it's very easy to think about the two places, today and tomorrow. But the interesting thing is not the today and the tomorrow, it's what comes in between. And that What comes in between is a transfer of energy. Today and tomorrow are places, there are times, there are specific instances. But what we're talking about is the movement of energy that happens in the meaning of change. So Luke, you have the rest of the lesson, but I just want to congratulate the class. You folks, these are actually simple ideas that are very deep. So Luke, back to you.
Well, thank you, Daniel. And I want to just pick up on that and this whole concept of change, because obviously change is happening all the time. And to this point of what's happening human energy, well, we also, I think, all know of examples of where negative, we've always got human energy. So if when human energy becomes negative, hope goes down, right? Collaboration goes down, right? Anger goes up. We see problems that come from that. But we also see, so you can have a negative feedback loop. This can work both ways. So you want to make sure that your feedback loop is spinning into a positive cycle as you address problems. And often, I think we've all been part of it. You go into a meeting and you actually walk out of the meeting, you all sit there and talk about the problems. You walk out of the meeting a lot less happy than when you walked into it. And you say, wow, why do we do this work? Nothing's possible. So that's an example of the feedback loop going the wrong way. But to Daniel's point about this and change, the case uses the analogy. I love the analogy because it reminds me of the view from outside of my home window, where I can see this huge rock that sits in the middle of a river. And this is the wave analogy, where when we think about something like a wave, the wave, water hitting a rock, creating a wave. The wave looks constant to the observer, but we know that everything around it is constantly changing. So the place of pollen, or let's take, our story from bombing. From the outside observer, it looks like a constant village, but it's constantly changing inside. Before Rima got there, it was negative change. Rima's able to start to change that feedback loop, creating things to be more positive. But let's think about Rima's role here, because in a minute we're going to get to talk about pollen, which is actually Rima's home. She is temporarily living in bombing she only lived there for about 18 months and was able to have this huge cascading effect. Think about that. And she didn't go there. She wasn't on a mission. She ended up there. And instead of just waiting for 18 months to be able to go back to her home village, she engaged her community. And she was able to make these huge impacts by building on the existing social structures, helping people to look at old problems in a new light. That is all Rima did in this story. She gave some new knowledge, and she was able to get people through that knowledge and through that mobilization. It took a lot of work. It took her caring enough to try. And then following up. And I know because, as I said, I visited there, and I was shocked to find out how far she had walked to meet with some of these 5 and then later 7 different action groups. But 3 things. The case talks of that Rima did 3 things really right. There's a reason why we wrote this story up specifically, that Rima did 3 things correctly in this. Does anybody remember what those are? Or did anybody note them down? Well, the first one was, I was just talking about it. She changed the context for the problems. She addressed these old problems in new ways. She was able to find solutions. She's saying, okay, you don't have a doctor. Well, let me show you how to prevent death instead of curing it. She helped people. And on top of that, she then helped people realize what they could do. It wasn't just about, and so one thing she did was change the context and try to get existing services, get people to mobilize to have those services to work better. But she also didn't start there. She didn't start by going and getting angry about the corrupt doctor, the ineffective school teacher. She helped people in that first meeting come learn to keep your children from dying. So both of these stories, I think one reason they're so compelling is the reason everybody's doing what they're doing in these stories is to keep children from dying. And that's a really powerful reason. And the last thing, this is really important for all of you in this class, for all of you who want to make sure you get a good grade in this class. What was the third thing that Rima specifically did? And I'm not going to give you this one. I need to hear it from a student.
Okay, Matt hit it.
Did Matt hit? Yeah, sorry, Matt. My chat was hidden. Good job. She measured the process, right? Because change is always happening, as we just talked about. It's always there. So measuring it, making a point to keep records and show how much change has happened. And this goes back for all of you, as you think about scaling up, you need to be able to track how and where the growth is occurring. You can say, I feel it, I feel like things are getting better. But if you cannot measure growth, then it's not really happening to anybody. And then you can't prove it's happening. I mean, you need to be able to have that proof. You need to be able to bring those people.
Community groups love to talk. Okay. You have all seen community groups talk. And they can talk positively, negatively. They can talk about the weather. They can talk about their politicians. But when you measure, you can change the talk. You can say, this is what's really happening. And there's going to be positive and negative happening all the time. It's like what Luke is saying about the wave and the water. The water's moving. You need to be able to lift up and accentuate. And that's where measurement is so important. But then the very important issue, which we're not going to talk about today, but know it's coming, is what do you measure? And how do you measure? And you have to measure quickly because change is happening very fast. So Luke, back to you.
Well, I might backtrack a bit on your statement there because we won't talk about what each of you are going to measure. That's what we're getting into in your lab assignments, right? This is why this lab assignment is so important. We are asking you to start with, how are you planning to analyze growth? That's what we are much more interested in, how you plan to analyze these seeds than what the seeds actually are. Because what we're trying to understand is that you understand what it feels like, how you would go about tracking something as complex as scaling up of both numbers and quality of life. It's not always the easiest thing to track, but you need to have easy ways to track it, or you won't keep getting your participation to go up. But in the case, let's turn our attention to the other, to Rima's home. Where did Rima learn this whole seed scale process that she started to do in Bombay? She learned it in Pollen. And that is because Rima was part of the delegation from the village of Pollen that went and lobbied in the state capitol. And so we'll talk about that story. It's a very, very compelling story. Both Daniel and I were part of the very first trip that went into Pollen. It was the very end of the road. We saw many things on that trip, animal sacrifices and all kinds of interesting things. But we also saw a cholera epidemic, and that was not as much fun. But well, we saw the tail end. We heard the stories. We were not there for the actual heat of the epidemic. But so in the Pollen case, and as the work in Pollen began, we came in on the heel of this horrible cholera outbreak, where hundreds of people throughout the region had died, but specifically in the village, they'd had dozens of deaths, especially of children. So this is not, this is not what we want. And measurement became very, very critical in this story. We don't have a chance to get into all the problems that we potentially were having in some of the with the other corrupt doctor in Pollen and some of those sorts of things, or Amko's lovely story about becoming a state singing star after having previously been in a very, very terrible relationship. But I want to talk about the role of the evidence and how evidence was employed to first mobilize the community around the cholera. Well, okay, so first of all, on day one of the training program, we taught them oral rehydration therapy. Now, oral rehydration therapy, for people who don't know, is a simple process of mixing grains, water, and salt together to rehydrate children and it can be a number one lifesaver in many parts of the world. And this was very important because the women felt very empowered, despite the fact they wish they had learned this sooner. Suddenly being able to say, equipping them, here's something you can do to take ownership of your child's healthcare. It's back to that same critical point of being able to save children from dying. But I want to talk about the measurement. What happened? What did the community do the following day that relating to measurement, and how was that impactful? What then happened?
The rate of days come down, and before Rima, the clinic was crowded, and after that, the people was able to solve their problem in their houses.
Yeah, so that's in the bombing story. In the pollen story, specifically, in the case of pollen, the community created maps. They used mapping. And we had the community map where were the worst cholera cases, where were the clusters of cholera. And then we had them map, and then we walked the community with them and showed them and asked them to look at their piping. And so what they were able to see is that in every case where the government installed piping, the government had cut corners and put the piping, it should have been buried, and they just ran this piping right down the road. And so the piping had cracked. And then other people had spliced into the piping. And so what you had was a very shoddy network of water network throughout this village. And at key areas in the water leaks and where people were tapping in, it was in those clusters where 90% of the deaths were concentrated. And so it quickly started to show the community that the cause of the cholera and this was not an act of God. This was a government service that was malfunctioning due to both ineptitude of the government, but also misuse by the people. Daniel?
3 things are being measured. Number one, as Luke says, we're making the map, and I want to come back to the map. But number 2, Luke has made a point about the people who are dying. But we were also gathering another number, which was the babies who were sick. Okay? So that you're starting to get on that map 3 types of data points. 1 is the broken pipes, 2 is the number of deaths, and 3 is the number of children. Of course, there's a larger context of the map, which is the map is a picture of the community. Now, just think of what is happening. The map is a piece of evidence. The community is everybody together. Okay, that's what we mean by community. It's a picture of the community, but it's not a physical picture. It's a picture that has these numbers and these maps on it. Now, one of the particular things, how did we make it? Well, everybody went around and made a map, but there's just a funny little story here that I have to tell you. We took a balloon, a hot air balloon, a helium balloon, and we put it on a piece of fishing wire, the balloon went up in the air and it had a camera on it. And we took a picture of that village. And so with the picture of the village that was taken from the air on this balloon with a camera, little digital camera, we had a different type of representation, which later we could use to who owns that house, or who owns that field, and so on and so forth. Now you don't have to put a balloon up in the air because you can just take a satellite image off of Google Earth of your community. But what is important is the role of evidence, because very soon you will see, as Luke walks you through, once they had the map, and as Luke, and the map was showing that the government had done a bad job with pipes. Well, I'll just finish and ask the question, what did they do with this map?
Especially love to hear from anyone who hasn't talked yet.
What did the women, these are women who are being chained up at night in some cases by their husband with chains.
Albert has said in the chat that the cases reported by the government services were 30, but in reality they were 345. Did the government services report wrong number knowing it was not true? Daniel, they would never do that, would they?
Well, the government had the key here, Albert. It's a great question. The 30 that the government reported was the people who came to the government. We went to the people with the survey. Okay, now maybe the government was falsifying the information. We've all seen governments do that. Okay, but the important thing, Albert, was that rather than using the government statistics, we collected our own statistics. And by we, I don't mean future generations. I mean the women themselves, with a map and noting deaths and illnesses on their map. Now, I want you to answer my question. What happened when these women, how did they use their map? How did they use their evidence?
So after getting the map, they form a group, and they form a 5 women in the group who can speak properly. So they went to a city in the government, and they showed the map with the evidence, like this is the place where the cholera is outbreak by the leakage of the pipes line. So after knowing that, I think government service has came to their house and they repair the pipelines, so that the death rate has decreased due to cholera outbreak.
I think you're 100% right, but it's much funnier than that. This was really funny. You had 5 women who put on their best saris. They were very scared. They had never gone to the government. So then how did they train themselves and get ready to go to the government?
They prepare themselves by looking at the mirror. They don't have courage to speak in front of government bodies or high rank people. So firstly, they prepare themselves by looking at the mirror. Then after developing confidence, they speak in front of group. Then after they select the 5 best people who can speak properly, and they went to the government.
See how human energy is growing? Human energy was so low in the beginning, but human energy rises when you put on your best dress, your best sari. Human energy rises when you practice in front of a mirror. Human energy gets directed when your friends tell you, oh, you can say it this way, you can say it that way. Okay, do you see the engine of empowerment that is growing here? It's women and women, it's a map, it's a mirror, it's getting in the bus and having your other women in the village pay your ticket because they didn't have the money. It's staying with your relatives and friends in the big city because you can't afford a hotel room and you would be afraid. And then the funny thing happens now we're talking about aspirations, then we're talking about action, and they walk into the government office and the government official says, no, 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 it's not so bad. There are only 30 deaths. How many times have you heard the government say, no, 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 it's not so bad? And these women get angry. And they say, that's my baby that's dying. My baby that's sick. Don't you tell me that. Have you ever seen 5 angry women? If you see 5 angry women, you don't want to see 25. So action creates rising aspirations and they go back to their village. Okay, now my next question here, folks, is once they go back to their village of pollen, there we go, Luke. I'll let you take over. Luke, you've got the slides.
Yeah, we're almost at time. So I want to do a summation. We'll close this. Unfortunately, we don't have time to stick entirely on the story, but aside from to say that let's start to think. You all are very more familiar with this concept, this our first dimension of scale, than you may realize, because as I've mentioned before, it really is what we spent most of ACC 601 looking at. And we saw our old friends, the 4 principles in this chapter very nicely. And so I would encourage all of you, if you know, reread these cases. They're very well put, and specifically, they also talk about a review of that seed process very well. But this is what we're seeing here. To look at this slide in front of us. At scale 1, your aim is to increase participation. That's the primary goal, is to get participation up. Okay, and you want to foster growth in numbers, and by getting energy going, getting that revolution of rising aspirations going, you are going to be getting better quality of life. But this is the important point in these stories, is about, and we touched on this in today's class, that when perception is negative, right, the participation in anything goes down. So if you think the health service doesn't work, you're not going to use it. But when that perception is positive, your participation will always go up. And so it's then about getting that news out. Okay. And in order to do this, you need to make sure in scale 1, these are the key, here's the kind of formula, the key things to remember about this first level or dimension of scaling up. Which, keep in mind, I always go back to what notice that this slide has not just the acronym, but I've written it out, because the goal here is to stimulating community awareness, learning, and energy. That's what we're doing. It's the goal, the action is stimulating that awareness. You're trying to get participation to go up. So therefore, you need to be having activities that do not seem unnecessary, redundant. And this is really important. They've got to be relevant to the time, place, and priorities of that community. The reason why the pollen and bombing cases are so powerful is because in one case you had a famine, and in the other case you just had this outbreak, and the government wasn't able to fix it. And so people turn that revolution, that feedback loop, from being in despair to one of hope. And so let's look. here is a new version of something you have seen before. But this is our revolution of rising aspirations at scale 1. See, here's our revolution. If you look in the middle of that graphic, you can see there's our revolution at the personal level, at the human level. Hopes, aspirations are going up. But now if we start to think about how does that cycle continue and radiate outward through a community, we start to see participation. Here we see the horizontal axis of participation going out. And on the other side, we see general life improvements and economic growth occurring. And you could have all kinds of other diagonal, talking about the fact that nutrition's improving and all these different things. But as we see that radiating outward here, that as participation goes up, they are getting better and better life improvements. And so this is what we really mean when we're talking about scale 1. And these stories are such powerful examples of people who really had nothing to work with aside from their human energy. And they were able to mobilize that human energy, get participation up. And as a result of that participation, and specifically participation equipped with evidence, get these top-down services, getting the enabling environment to actually be enabling and to help. And through that is how they achieve this rapid scaling up of growth. And as we saw, in the case of pollen, it was so rapid that on its own, Rima went to a new village and that all took. I arrived, Future Generations had nothing with starting all that work or sending Rima to bombing. We started a project in pollen. And 2 years later, I went to a village halfway across the state and saw 7 mobilized action groups that had achieved this on their own. It's a just very, very powerful story. So we're at time, but Daniel, do you want to make a closing 1 or 2 statements? We understand if anyone has to hop off, but I think that Daniel and I are at least going to keep talking about this for a minute.
Enabling environment. That's what you're changing. You're making the enabling environment hopeful. You're getting government officials who want to do a better job. There are 2 or 3 enabling environments. One is the enabling environment of the group of women, okay? It's not one woman, it's a group of women. That's an enabling environment of supporting each other, whether it's 5 women going into a government's office or it's women having an action group and bombing. That's one enabling environment. That's something called an LCC, Local Coordinating Committee, that we talk about in scale. The second enabling environment is if you can get multiple groups of those happening in scale 1, which is what Luke was just summarizing in that slide. That's a stronger force, a larger force. And then there's the third enabling environment, which is all the policies that the government provides and the people the government provides. And then we start to get into the potential for scale squared because we start to see the quality of life flowing back through those 3 enabling environments. You're using the system you have to, and then through using it, you're making it more enabling.
Great. Well, at that, thanks, Daniel. I'm gonna just stop our recording and formally end class, but folks are welcome to stick around if you have got questions.